begins today. We look back at the assassination of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton in Chicago 51 years ago, and how new documents reveal more details about the FBI's role in the murder of the 21-year-old revolutionary. Fred Hampton was killed December 4th, 1969, when Chicago police raided his apartment and shot and killed him in his own bed. Black Panther leader Mark Clark was also killed by police in that raid. Authorities initially claimed the Panthers had opened fire on the police who were there to serve a search warrant for weapons. Evidence later emerged that told a very different story. The FBI, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and Chicago police had conspired to assassinate Fred Hampton.
Before the world knew his name, before the state branded him dangerous, before a bullet tore through the silence of pre-dawn, there was a boy with a smile like sunlight, and a fire that refused to be extinguished. His name was Fred Hampton. But this is not just a story about a young black man from Maywood, Illinois. This is the story of what America fears the most: a black leader who could unite the poor. Frederick Allen Hampton was born on August 30th, 1948, into a working-class black family in the small suburb of Maywood, just outside Chicago. His father worked at a meat-packing plant, and his mother was a homemaker. Together, they instilled in him the quiet dignity of hard labor and the radical idea that he was somebody, even if the world said otherwise. He wasn't born into revolution, but he was born into the crosshairs of a country that made revolution necessary. By the age of 10, Fred was already asking questions most grown men were too afraid to consider. Why do we live here and they live there? Why is our school crumbling? Others has new books. Why do the police smile at them, but point guns at us? Fred was sharp. So sharp he skipped 2 grades. His teachers called him gifted. His classmates called him the leader. Even then, they could see something in him. That rare spark, that fearlessness. He didn't just speak. He made people listen. At Proviso East High School, he led walkouts demanding that black students be allowed to use the swimming pool, a facility that had effectively been off-limits due to racism. His voice was calm but firm. He was just a teenager, but he knew something most adults had forgotten. You don't beg for dignity, you organize for it. It was the early 1960s, and across America, the civil rights movement was unfolding. Sit-ins, marches, dogs, fire hoses, death. The South was burning, but so was the North, quietly, systemically. In Chicago, discrimination wore a suit and tie. It lived in redlining maps. It choked schools. It starved black neighborhoods of resources, and it did so with a smile. Fred wasn't blind to any of it. He studied the teachings of Malcolm X, Dr. King, and Marx. But he didn't follow blindly. He merged their ideologies into something new, a philosophy that combined militant self-defense with community love. Revolution not just through rage, but through service. After high school, Fred joined the NAACP's Youth Council in Maywood. By 18, he was its leader, but he wasn't interested in just holding a title. He held food drives, led reading programs, challenged the police, and wherever he went, he carried the same message. We're not begging for crumbs. We want a whole damn bakery. But the more people listened, the more powerful he became, and the more dangerous he was seen to be. Edgar Hoover had a term for young, charismatic black leaders with the power to unite the oppressed. A black messiah. And according to the FBI, Fred Hampton was exactly that. They didn't fear guns. They feared unity. They feared that a 19-year-old from Maywood could walk into a room full of Puerto Rican gang leaders, Southern white radicals, and black community members and make them chant the same chant. Power to the people. But before he became Chairman Fred of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, before the helicopters circled, before the betrayal, before the bullets tore through his body as he slept beside his pregnant partner. There was just a boy with too much love for his people, too much courage for his enemies, and too much power for the state to let him live. He was just 20 years old, no title from a university, no law degree, no official rank. But when Fred Hampton spoke, people didn't just listen. They stood up. In the blood-stained streets of Chicago's West Side, where sirens sang lullabies and landlords let walls rot from the inside out, a new sound began to rise, sharper than bullets, stronger than fear. The voice of a leader who didn't run from power. He handed it to the people. By 1968, Fred Hampton had caught the attention of one of the most militant and misunderstood organizations in American history. The Black Panther Party. Not a gang, not a hate group, but a political movement rooted in love. Love that fed the hungry. Love that clothed the poor. Love that armed the oppressed with knowledge. And if necessary, with self-defense. Fred didn't just join the party. He electrified it. We don't hate the white people. We hate the oppressors, whether they be white, black, brown, or blue. You don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with water. He quickly rose through the ranks, organizing breakfast programs, medical clinics, and political education classes. But this wasn't charity. It was strategy. Because a fed child learns, an educated mother resists, and a healthy people revolt. The Panthers didn't just speak truth to power. They lived it. And Fred? He was the heartbeat of it all. He crisscrossed Chicago, recruiting young people who once wore gang colors, and giving them purpose instead of pistols. And then, he did something unthinkable. He united them. The Rainbow Coalition wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born in the back streets of Chicago, in barbershops, housing projects, and church basements. Fred Hampton brought together Black Panthers, the Young Lords, Puerto Rican activists, and even the Young Patriots, white Appalachian migrants with Confederate patches who were tired of being poor and ignored. You heard that right. Fred made poor white folks chant with black revolutionaries, not in spite of their differences, but because of their shared struggle. We're not fighting racism with racism, he said. We're fighting capitalism with solidarity.
I'm the deputy chairman of the state of Illinois Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton. We work with anybody and form coalition with anybody that has revolution on their mind. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that. You're going to have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people. I'm not the pig. You've got to make a distinction. And the people are going to have to attack the pigs. The people are going to have to stand up against the pigs. That's what the Panthers are doing. That's what the Panthers are doing all over the world. We're not a racist sort of... We don't hate the motherfucking white people. We hate the oppressor, whether he be white, black, brown, or yellow. We're going to fight racism, not racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people. And we're going to have to put it back in the hands of the people. And these people... Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all. That's the people's thing. Socialism is the people. You're afraid of yourself. If you're afraid of socialism, you're afraid of yourself. So education, you have neo-colonialism instead of colonialism. What we're talking about is there has to be educational program. That's very important, because if they don't have an education, then they're nowhere. You dig what I'm saying? They're nowhere, because they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. You understand me? You might be able to get them caught up in because they're poor and they want something. And then if they're not educated, they want more, and before you know it, they'll be capitalists, and before you know it, we'll have Negro imperialism.
That was the tipping point. Unity. Across color lines. Across class. Across fear. And to the FBI, that was the greatest threat of all. Edgar Hoover personally ordered Hampton to be monitored. COINTELPRO, The FBI's secret domestic surveillance program labeled him a Black Messiah, a figure capable of sparking a revolution that could topple the system from the inside out. They weren't just watching Fred. They were preparing to stop him by any means necessary. Unknown to Fred, one of his own was working for the enemy, a man named William ONeal, young, ambitious, and scared, had been flipped by the FBI after being caught stealing a car. In exchange for freedom, he became their most valuable asset inside the Illinois chapter of the Panthers. His mission was clear: infiltrate, report, sabotage, and when the time came, assist in neutralization. ONeal didn't just spy. He drew maps of Fred's apartment. He drugged his drink the night before the raid. He even became Fred's security chief. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone could imagine. Still, Fred never stopped. He continued to speak, to organize, to love. His partner, Accuse and Jerry, then Deborah Johnson, was pregnant with their first child. He was just 21 years old, a child himself, preparing to raise one. And yet, his eyes never left the mission. "I may not be here when the revolution comes," he once said, "but you can believe I'll be a part of it." He didn't know how right he would be.
Like we always did, if you actually make a commitment at the age of 20, and you say, I don't want to make that commitment, because for the simple reason that I'm too young to die, I want to live a little bit longer, what you did, you did already. I'm saying something that might wake up some other exploited people and some other oppressed people, and if all these people ever get together, then these pigs that are exploiting us, we'll be able to run them into the lake. That's why they want to get rid of us. I don't believe I'm going to die from slipping on a piece of ice. I don't believe I'm going to die because I got a bad heart. I don't believe I'm going to die because of lung cancer. I believe that I'm going to be able to die what I was in the things that I was born for. I believe that I'm going to be able to die high off the people. I believe that I will be able to die as a revolutionary in the international revolutionary proletarian struggle. Why don't you live for the people? Why don't you struggle for the people? Why don't you die for the people? All we want to know is that you're doing what we'd be doing if we were here. And you got to do that. You can't do it unless you believe that you can do it. In the spirit of liberation, we understand that they want everybody in the party in jail. So the quick solution, the speedy one, nobody goes. Nobody goes. We all stay right here. With the people? Because we love the people. Okay, you can put your hands down now. We say all power to all people. We say white power to white people. Brown power to brown people. Yellow power to yellow people. Black power to black people. X power to those that we left out. We say Panther power to the Vanguard Party. Before you go to bed, man, say I am a revolutionary. Make that the last word.
On the night of December 3rd, 1969, Fred attended a community meeting, then returned home to his modest apartment at 2337 West Monroe Street. Accuse made him dinner. They laughed. He drank a small glass of Kool-Aid. He didn't know it had been laced with a sedative. That would be the last night he'd ever speak to his child or see the sun rise. At 4:45 a.m., silence shattered. The Chicago Police Department, with intelligence from the FBI and guidance from William ONeal, stormed the apartment in a brutal raid. Over 90 shots were fired. Fred Hampton never fired back. He never even woke up. An officer stood over his unconscious body and fired 2 point-blank bullets into his head. One officer was heard saying, "He's good and dead now." Accuse survived. She was 9 months pregnant and covered in Fred's blood. Fred Hampton Jr. would be born just weeks later. Fred Hampton was 21 years old, but he'd already changed the world. The government called it a shootout, but history, and the bullet holes all pointing inward, called it what it was: an execution. But what they didn't realize is that you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill the revolution.
A century since the brutal assassination of Chairman Fred Hampton Sr.
The Black Panther Party leader was killed in a coordinated plot by Chicago police and the FBI.
As Fox 32 honors Black History Month, our Nate Rogers takes a look at Hampton's legacy, including some never-before-seen photos from that time.
This is a revolutionary organization fighting for the minds and hearts of the people, in theory and in practice.
Fed up with police brutality, Black Panthers patrolled their neighborhoods heavily armed. 1969, Chairman Fred Hampton and his fiancée were in the bed sleeping when 19 officers raided their apartment, firing 99 bullets into the mattress. Chairman Hampton's fiancée, 8 months pregnant, forced to leave the room.
She boldly heard the shots, the extra shots, and then she heard the officer say something to the effect of, "He's good and dead now."
I heard the sister scream. They stopped shooting. Pig said, "He's good and dead now."
The people didn't just mourn Fred Hampton. They demanded justice. The raid lasted 7 minutes. 99 bullets were fired. Only one came from Panther's gun, and even that was shot after the assault began. But by sunrise, the police told the press a different story. They said it was a shootout, that they were ambushed by extremists, that Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were violent threats to America. What they didn't say was that Fred never fired a single shot, that he never even opened his eyes, that he died drugged, in his bed, beside his pregnant fiancée. The scene was staged. Weapons were placed. Walls were patched. And blood was cleaned before independent investigators could even reach the door. This wasn't just about killing a man. This was about erasing a movement, and they almost got away with it. But they didn't count on the survivors. They didn't count on the people Fred had awakened. And they definitely didn't count on a fiery 19-year-old lawyer named Flint Taylor and the People's Law Office. The moment word of the raid hit the streets, outrage exploded. Protesters surrounded the apartment. Cameras rolled. And then, something happened that changed everything. The public was invited to walk through the crime scene. And what they saw didn't match the police report. Bullet holes were all incoming. Bloodstains marked where Fred's body had been dragged. And the floor, soaked in his blood, still told the truth. It became undeniable. Even mainstream reporters began to question the official narrative. And behind the scenes, the People's Law Office started building what would become one of the most explosive legal battles of the 20th century. They weren't just suing the police. They were suing the FBI for conspiracy to assassinate Fred Hampton. But the system doesn't confess easily. The trial dragged on for 13 years. 13 years of buried documents, perjured testimony, stolen files, death threats. But then, one mistake changed everything. A single file folder, misplaced. Inside that folder was the smoking gun, a memorandum from the FBI, outlining how they used informant William ONeal to infiltrate the Panthers, how they provided the floor plan of Fred's apartment, how they authorized the very raid that ended in his murder. It wasn't just a local police operation. It was a federal execution. The file even contained a report proudly noting that the FBI had prevented the rise of a Black Messiah. They used those exact words. Black Messiah. Fred wasn't just a man. To them, he was a threat to empire, because the empire fears what it can't control. And in Fred, they saw more than speeches. They saw someone who could unite the broken, heal the wounded, and organize the angry. That kind of power terrifies
This is
tyrants.
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. As Black History Month begins today, we look back at the assassination of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton in Chicago 51 years ago, and how new documents reveal more details about the FBI's role in the murder of the 21-year-old revolutionary. Fred Hampton was killed December 4th, 1969, when Chicago police raided his apartment and shot and killed him in his own bed. Black Panther leader Mark Clark was also killed by police in that raid. Authorities initially claimed the Panthers had opened fire on the police who were there to serve a search warrant for weapons. Evidence later emerged that told a very different story. The FBI, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and Chicago police had conspired to assassinate Fred Hampton. Now, several hundred pages of FBI memos and reports obtained by historian and writer Aaron Leonard through a Freedom of Information Act request document development that the director of the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division, William Sullivan, and the head of the extremist section of the Domestic Intelligence Division, George Moore, both played key roles in planning the raid and the cover-up that followed. For more on what these documents say, we're joined by Flint Taylor and Jeff Haas, founding members of the People's Law Office in Chicago, who are the lead lawyers in the landmark Fred Hampton and Mark Clark civil rights case. Their new piece for Truth Out is headlined, "New Documents Suggest J. Edgar Hoover Was Involved in Fred Hampton's Murder." Jeff Haas, let's begin with you. You wrote a book about Fred Hampton. Talk about what these new documents show and what you see as the smoking gun of J. Edgar Hoover's direct involvement.
Thank you, Amy. Well, first of all, it's 51 years after the incident and 40-some years after the trial. We had never gotten these documents before. But what they showed was that Hoover and Sullivan and Moore were following Roy Mitchell, a special agent in charge, very closely with regard to ONeal. And they were complimenting him and rewarding him from the moment he gave the information and the floor plan to Special Agent Mitchell. They were congratulating Mitchell on what a wonderful job he did with this informant. Of course, Mitchell got the floor plan, gave it to Hanrahan's police, and that's what led to the raid. The floor plan even showed the bed where Hampton and Johnson would be sleeping. So we knew much of this. We knew ONeal had gotten a bonus. We never knew Mitchell got a bonus. And we never knew that Hoover and Sullivan and Moore were starting to watch this in November, 10 days before it happened. They were monitoring exactly what went on. And so it was approved at the highest level. And during the trial, we had sought to go up to Sullivan and Moore and Hoover, but the judge wouldn't allow us, and we thought perhaps even John Mitchell and Richard Nixon were involved. We didn't have these documents, so we couldn't uncover that. This also shows that after the raid, the head of the FBI in Chicago met with and congratulated the informant ONeal, thanked him for his information, which led to the success of the raid. What's also interesting is 51 years later, these documents still have redactions. There's a specific redaction because an FBI agent had been called in front of a grand jury, and he was told, if you get asked any questions about blank, which is the FBI, leave the grand jury and report to your higher-ups. A year after the raid, the FBI role and COINTELPRO had never been disclosed. It was only about Hanrahan and the police. So it took us 13 years to uncover that it was COINTELPRO, a program whose objective was disrupt, destroy, and neutralize the Panthers, and specifically prevent the rise of a black messiah like Fred Hampton, who could unify and electrify the masses. It was this FBI program that led to the passing of the floor plan and the 90 shots, and Fred Hampton executed in his bed at 2:30 in the morning on December 4th.
Now, Jeff, the documents also seem to indicate that there was a plan to cover up the FBI's involvement in the raid. Could you talk about that aspect of what you've uncovered?
Yes. At the grand jury, this was a special state grand jury, because the black community was so outraged and there was a lot of pressure, they called a special grand jury. Well, they allowed the FBI agent who talked about who fired the guns, but they didn't allow anybody to talk about the floor plan or the role of the informant, William ONeal, in setting up the raid and getting a bonus for it. So that was kept quiet. Matter of fact, if there hadn't been a raid at the Media, Pennsylvania FBI office, we might never have learned about COINTELPRO.
And in terms of why it's taken so long and there's still redactions on some of these documents, I mean, there's the assassination of President Kennedy. There have been documents released from that. And here we have one radical revolutionary in Chicago, and it's taken so long just to get information about what actually happened.
Well, yes, I think the cover-up continues in the fact that many of these pages contain redaction, including the information from ONeal. So there are things the FBI has still not released, we think, showing the involvement of higher-ups. We do have a continuous rewarding of the Special Agent Roy Mitchell, referring to the success of the raid, how the raid was critical to the role of the FBI. So see, some of these documents are new. But for the next year, Roy Mitchell got congratulated for how well he had handled ONeal and how important the information had gotten. And they continuously internally called the rate of success, while externally they were hiding it.
I want to bring Flint Taylor into this conversation, co-founder of the People's Law Office in Chicago. You and Jeff were arrested for protesting what you called in the piece the outrageous rulings of the judge and the blatant misconduct of the defense. Can you explain what this trial was, Flint?
Well, this was a trial, 18 months on trial, Jeff and I and others in our office, fighting to get these documents out, fighting to establish the role of the FBI. And we had a judge who was very similar to Judge Hoffman in the Conspiracy 8 trial, which many people may remember. And he was dead set against us. He was originally from Alabama. He was a racist, and he did not believe and would not let us get at the evidence that the FBI was involved in this case. But we were developing this evidence along with the Senate Select Committee, the Church Committee. So we were exposing this evidence both in court and outside of court, and the judge was getting more and more upset with us. And so when we protested the unfair rulings that he was making, he was keeping us from putting Hoover in the case. He was keeping us from putting John Mitchell and the others from Washington in the case. And he was keeping us from getting the documents that showed the bonus to ONeal, the informant. All of this we were fighting for day and day after day. And when we protested, both of us at various times were held in contempt and sent to the federal lockup here in Chicago. But we kept fighting it. The judge threw the case out after 18 months of trial, believe it or not. He wouldn't let the jury decide the case. We fought to appeal, and we won a remarkable decision in the Court of Appeals, defended it in the U.S. Supreme Court, and 13 years of litigation and fighting to get the evidence out, we were ultimately able to obtain one of the largest, if not the largest, police violence settlement for the families of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton and the surviving Panthers in the history at that time of the federal courts.
And Flint, for the younger members of our audience who really do not perhaps understand the role and significance of the Black Panther Party, and, for instance, J. Edgar Hoover labeling them the greatest domestic threat to the U.S. government. Hoover was aware by then, although the public found out later, that there had been polling done, secret polling done, that showed that more than 25% of all African Americans at the time supported the Black Panther Party. Could you talk about the party's significance?
Party was very significant, and its leadership was as well. And Fred Hampton was not only an up-and-coming leader, but a very charismatic and dynamic leader. And the Panthers had a 10-point program. That program covered the waterfront with all sorts of revolutionary and socialistic programs, free breakfast program, for example, free medical clinic, for another example, a newspaper that came out every week and talked about the atrocities of the police and the government. It was very much an anti-imperialist organization, fought against the war in Vietnam, said people should not go to Vietnam, opposed mass incarceration before there actually was that term, and also was very strong in setting up and fighting for coalitions between Black, Hispanic, or like the Young Lords, of course, you know about that, Juan, and other organizations, revolutionary and radical organizations. And this is another reason why Hoover feared the Panthers so much, because they were bringing together all sorts of different radical and revolutionary groups, groups against the war in Vietnam. And this was very threatening to the government at that time. And they targeted under the COINTELPRO program, which was focused to destroy the Black Panther Party, on Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, because they were so successful here in Chicago.
In 1982, after over a decade of denial, a civil suit settlement was finally reached. The government admitted no guilt, but paid out $1.85 million to the families of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. It was the largest civil rights settlement in U.S. history at the time. But no one went to jail. Not the officers who fired. Not the FBI agents who plotted. Not the informant who betrayed. Because in America, you can murder a black revolutionary. You can lie about it and still walk free. William ONeal, the informant who delivered Fred into the government's hands, lived for decades with the weight of his choices. In 1990, just hours after giving a haunting interview for a PBS documentary, he ran into traffic and ended his life. His last words on tape, "I had no allegiance. I had no ideology. But Fred Hampton did. And it cost him everything." Fred's son, Fred Hampton Jr., never got to meet his father, but he carries his name and his mission into a new generation, fighting gentrification, building schools, feeding the people, because revolutions don't die.
A lot of
They
people ask
evolve.
me, how do you feel with seeing, hearing about, your father being assassinated at 21 years of age? If that was the first image I was to see, it would probably have a different impact. I think it's imperative that people see the life, not the existence, but the life of change.
They tried to erase Fred Hampton, but they only made him eternal. Because when you dare to organize the poor, when you teach unity over hate, when you build power from the ground up, you don't just leave a legacy, you leave a blueprint. They tried to kill the man, but the movement, that was never going to die. They killed him at 21. Fred Hampton never got to see his child. He never got to see the headlines change. He never got to hear the world chant his name. But somehow, he still speaks. From Chicago to Ferguson, from Oakland to Minneapolis, from young organizers on corners to teachers in classrooms. Fred's voice still echoes. You can jail a revolutionary, but you can't jail the revolution. That wasn't a slogan. It was a promise. Because even as the state plotted to erase him, his ideas spread like wildfire. Today, we see his fingerprints on every grassroots struggle for justice. The free breakfast programs? Fred helped pioneer them, feeding thousands of kids before school, long before it was a government idea. Police abolition? Fred called it in 1969. Not just reform, but community control. Power to the people. Black-brown alliances? Fred didn't just preach it. He practiced it. The Rainbow Coalition he built, Black Panthers, Young Lords, Young Patriots, wasn't symbolic. It was strategic unity across color lines, forged in fire, based on shared oppression and collective action. That kind of unity scared the system, because they could handle a riot. They couldn't handle a revolution. Today, Fred Hampton Jr. carries that torch. He leads the Prisoners of Conscience Committee, organizing food drives, political education, and community outreach in his father's name. He calls it keeping the streets and the sweets connected. And every time he speaks, it's as if Fred lives again. We're not commemorating death, he once said. We're commemorating resistance. But Fred's legacy isn't just in his bloodline. It's in every classroom where kids learn the truth about CONTLPRO. It's in every protest demanding justice. It's in every child who eats for free because someone cared enough to organize. Fred's dream wasn't to become a martyr. It was to build a world where martyrdom wasn't necessary. That dream still burns. But the forces he fought, poverty, racism, surveillance, police brutality, they haven't disappeared. They've evolved. The names have changed. The tactics have gotten slicker. But the mission remains. So what do we do with Fred's legacy? We don't just mourn it. We mobilize it. We ask the hard questions. Who are the Fred Hamptons of today? Who's feeding the kids? Who's organizing tenants? Who's educating without permission? Because the revolution Fred dreamed of wasn't a moment. It was a movement, a living, breathing thing that only dies if we let it. And right now, across this country, across the world, that movement is still alive. In every mutual aid fridge, in every Know Your Rights workshop, In every jailhouse lawyer teaching others to
Fred Hampton
fight.
stood for.
He was brave, he stood for power and change.
A legacy like none other. The Hampton House, Chairman Hampton's Maywood childhood home, now a historical landmark, distributing free clothes and food 24/7. At Proviso East High School, inside room 35, the Chairman Fred Hampton Social Justice Room for community meetings and student activities. Chairman Hampton, a 1966 graduate here, his passion, his death, continuing to inspire generations of leaders.
Don't be scared to speak out and, do the right thing.
Fred once said, "I am a revolutionary." Not because it was cool, not because it was safe, but because he believed in people power more than anything else. He believed that the oppressed could educate, organize, and liberate themselves. Without permission, without apology, without compromise. So now it's your turn. Not to just remember Fred Hampton, but to be Fred Hampton, to organize, to question, to protect your people, to build, because they can silence a voice, but they can't stop an idea. And this idea, it's still marching, still feeding, still fighting, and it's still whispering, all power to the people. Thank you for listening to this 4-part journey through the life, murder, and legacy of Fred Hampton. If this story moved you, don't just share it, live it, because somewhere, right now, the next Fred Hampton is watching, waiting, and wondering if we're ready. If stories like this move you, if you believe the truth deserves to be heard and the forgotten deserve to be remembered, then join us. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and become part of a community dedicated to uncovering the powerful history they don't want you to know. Together, we'll keep these voices alive and make sure they echo through generations. Don't just watch history. Be a part of rewriting it. Subscribe now.